So, warm welcome to my podcast channel, Stephen. Good morning from this side. I guess there's evening from there, right?
It is. It's 8 p.m.
Okay, all right. And I would like to tell my viewers that Stephen is a psychedelics educator, author, and organizer. So, kindly enlighten me and my viewers about your work, Stephen.
Okay. Um, let's go right back to the beginning.
Hmm.
Um, I'm an elder, so I've been around for a while, and I actually came of age when there was a flowering, you might say, an explosion of interest in psychedelics and spirituality. Much of that interest in spirituality, by the way, was an interest in Asian spirituality. Hinduism, for example, Zen Buddhism, for example, Tibetan Buddhism, etc. So those two cultural phenomena essentially dovetailed, occurred pretty much at the same time, beginning, well, for the most of us, the late 1960s and early 1970s. And so I was interested in both of those. A lot of people were interested in the psychedelics for what you might call adventurous reasons or, entertainment or sensationalist kinds of reasons. I was attracted to them for somewhat similar reasons, but I also was very interested in their spiritual potential. So it goes back to then. Now, I didn't know anything, and hardly anyone in the Western culture did, or anywhere in the world for that matter. I didn't know anything about what I now consider to be essential, which is these terms that are commonly used. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but your listeners may not be. Set and setting.
Okay.
Have you heard that term?
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. Well, it's well known among people who work with psychedelics. So first of all, I want to say that again, since you don't seem to be particularly informed about this, and that's not a judgment, just an observation. There's a lot of misunderstanding about psychedelics. They're not when they're used properly, when they're understood properly, they should not be considered drugs. Although many people will think, of
Okay.
course, they're drugs. They're not. They're not drugs in an important sense, in an essential sense. They are, when used properly, they are healing medicines,
Hmm.
sacraments. They are spiritual sacraments, and they are not. They do not produce artificial healing or artificial enlightenment, so to speak. You don't get enlightened from using psychedelics. You potentially have openings so that you can glimpse a larger unconditioned reality. Then you still have to go back to the daily life and put those insights into perspective. But the insights themselves are real, and there are millions and millions of people who would attest to that. So there are judgments in spiritual communities about psychedelics because they think that's artificial enlightenment, and that is simply not true. Mystics report the same description of mystical experiences as psychedelic people who have mystical experiences do. So, anyway, set and setting means your intention. The set means the everything you bring to an encounter with a psychedelic sacrament. So that means like who you are, what your long and short term psychology and mood is, and in particular your intention. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this because you want some kind of thrill, or to escape your life or whatever? Or are you genuinely interested in spiritual growth? So you need to have that kind of set or intention to begin with. And then if you have that properly in place, the other component is setting. The setting is pretty much just what it sounds like. Where do you do this medicine? But it has
Hmm.
broad implications because it doesn't just mean the physical setting, it means all the components of the environment you do it in, and that includes the kind of guidance you have. And that is an essential aspect of this work. some, people can take a psychedelic like psilocybin mushrooms on their own, and they may have fantastic experiences, but there's a much better chance that you will have a truly beneficial experience and safe experience if you do it with an experienced and ethical guide of some sort, whether that be one person guiding you in a one-on-one situation like a therapist or what they call a psychedelic guide these days, or whether that be a ceremonial leader of some kind. For example, with ayahuasca, ayahuasca is a medicine. Do you know anything about these? Are you familiar at all with these medicines?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say that the point that you mentioned about psilocybin mushrooms, right? That's what you said.
Yes. Yeah.
So a few days ago, I interviewed a lady. She as of now she lives in Jamaica because this thing has been banned in a lot of countries. So she
That's
was
true.
not allowed to do practice this thing. She's a
Yeah.
holistic healer. So she
Yeah.
does this kind of therapy in Jamaica. So I had
Yeah.
interviewed her and she enlightened me about all these things, how these things
Okay.
work, and if you do it in the right manner under the observation of a like you said, like a psychologist or healer, then you'll get benefits out of it. You are not supposed to do it on your own. So
Not.
in that
It's much
context,
more, much more dangerous and much less likely to produce the kind of results that are possible. But I was going to mention ayahuasca. So the two most common psychedelics these days, most commonly used, are psilocybin mushrooms and
yeah.
ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, I could talk about all evening because it's a unique medicine. It actually requires a minimum of two plants, two separate plants, and it's kind of miraculous in a way because the Amazonian region of South America is a vast area, and traditionally tribes all over the Amazon found these two separate plants out of the millions of plant species in the Amazon that are required to work together. One of them is a climbing vine called Banisteriopsis caapi, and by itself, it's not psychedelic. And then there's another plant called, it has a couple of different names, called chacruna, most commonly, also Psychotria viridis. It contains substance called DMT. Well, DMT is the strongest psychedelic on the planet. However, because of acids in our stomach, it's neutralized in the stomach. But what the sort of miracle here is, or the magic is, that the vine neutralizes the acids that neutralize the DMT, so that the DMT can go in and have its effect. So it's a remarkable medicine, and it has a long history in South America of healers or shamans conducting it. So there's a lot of tradition there. So going back to my sort of biography, if you will, I got very interested in those things when I was a young man. But then there was an idea floating around at the time, which was, okay, maybe you've had an experience of divine love or the ultimate, enlightenment moment, satori, as they call it in Zen. But now what are you going to do? You can't dwell there, and you can't keep taking LSD or whatever you're taking, every weekend for the rest of your life. So what are you going to do if you're serious about spiritual growth? Well, you have to have an ongoing relationship with spiritual practice of some kind or another. So meditation is the most universal, and then various versions of yoga can be very helpful in particular. So I got interested in meditation and connected with Tibetan Buddhism. So I left those substances alone for about 10 or 15 years until I came upon a work of a fellow named Terence McKenna. That's McKenna. If people are interested, he has a lot of videos on YouTube and several books. He's not around anymore. He died about 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. Anyway, Terence reconnected for me the lineages, if you will, or the streams of spiritual work and psychedelics, pointing out that they actually have thousands of years of history in many indigenous communities around the planet, for use for healing and spiritual work, not for recreational purposes. So that got me interested again. And then one thing after another happened. I'll cut short a little bit, but basically I got involved with a couple of different traditions that worked with these, like the Native American Church, which uses the peyote cactus in their sacraments. They run, in terms of set and setting, and setting in particular, they have, we use the word container, a container for doing this work. They put an amazing container, very safe and solid container together. So I got involved, very much involved with those. And then, excuse me, at some point I got invited to, well, actually, I wrote a book I published in 2011 called Returning to Sacred World. And it was basically everything I thought I had sort of learned about spirituality up until that time. So that connected me to a fellow who was running a conference in my city here in Canada called Vancouver, on the west coast of Canada. And for 13 years, ending last year, I just retired from it, I was the lead organizer of that conference. It's called the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. And we brought in many leaders in psychedelic field to help educate people about that kind of effective and safe use of psychedelics that I spoke of. So I've been engaged with that world quite actively, quite involved for those past, more than a dozen years. And then I wrote a second book. When I say wrote, I wrote about 20% of the content, but I had 17 other contributors. And the reason I put that book together, it's called Cannabis and Spirituality. And the reason I put that book together was because cannabis is so common, it's everywhere, certainly in the West, and but it's not understood as a spiritual medicine. So I wanted to help correct that by pointing out to people that cannabis actually has an ancient history on this planet of such use, and India is one of those places where it goes way back. The sadhus and others, have used cannabis as a spiritual medicine. And not just them, but certainly them, but also China, other countries in Asia. I mean, there's indications that cannabis was used spiritually as long as 10,000 years ago in some places like China, It's certainly everywhere. The thing about cannabis is that it's arguably our most important plant on this planet. It's one of the easiest plants to grow in multiple climates. It has dozens of medicinal uses, which go back historically in Asia in particular. They're folk medicine use cannabis for many, many different remedies. And in fact, the lineage of this plant, what's called the Cannabaceae lineage, is estimated by scientists to be somewhere between 30 million and 90 million years old. So cannabis has been on this planet long before we were. And since, there didn't used to be grocery stores, to put it lightly, the people used to have to know every plant around them. If you lived in a village in Asia, you would eventually, over the generations, your community would know every plant. You would know, is this plant safe to eat? Can it be used for making clothing or building materials? Can it be used for medicine or whatever? So because cannabis is so ubiquitous, so omnipresent, there's no doubt that people would have found that plant. And it wouldn't have taken them long to find out that if you burned it and inhaled it, you would have these really interesting altered experiences. So there's an ancient history of spiritual use of cannabis that is not well known. It's getting better known now, but that was part of the reason for doing that book. So that book came out in late 2016. And then 3 years ago, I published another book, or I didn't publish it, I have a publisher, but this one I contributed less to. I was more editor and only wrote 2 or 3 chapters and had 25 contributors. And that was called How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World. Visionary and indigenous voices speak out. So, and now I'm actually working on another book. This will be, I think, my last book. This one I have only a working title for. I'm currently calling it Psychedelic Fireside Stories. And then the subtitle would be something like Tales and Teachings from the Spiritual Path. And basically, what I've done is what I'm doing, almost completed it, is collecting stories from myself and other people that are instructive and hopefully entertaining about their experiences with these plants when they've used them effectively, not recreationally, when they've used them for in ritual contexts, in healing contexts, ceremonial contexts, and had remarkable experiences and insights and learnings from them. So that sums up my work basically.
Got it. And Stephen, like you said, like about the sadhus of India, I guess we have known them for years. Like we often see them doing all this kind of stuff, like cannabis that you mentioned, then marijuana, I guess, weeds. They tend to do all this kind of things while doing that sadhana, while doing their penance. So I guess that's what you meant by doing when it comes to spirituality, because we often see that they are smoking some sort of thing. I guess it can be cannabis or it can be weed, marijuana. They tend to do it.
Marijuana is cannabis. It's
Okay, got it.
just another word for it. And if you see sadhu smoking something, there's a pretty good chance that it's marijuana or
Yeah.
cannabis. Same thing, right?
Okay.
Because they have
Got
a thousands-year-old history of doing that.
it.
It's been around. It's been around forever. In fact, cannabis, marijuana, if you want to call it that, has been part of Indian society for a very long time, both for religious purposes and for what you might call social purposes. The Brahmin class used to make drinks. They're still easy to find in some places in India. I'm sure you might have heard
Yeah.
about that, or sometimes referred to as a bang or a bang lassi,
Mhm.
mixed with yogurt and a couple of spice, herbs or whatever, and they put some cannabis, like hashish or something, in them, and they can be extremely strong, and but in mild form. I have read that the Brahmin class, that was they weren't drinking alcohol for social purposes. So if you went to what in the West we might call a cocktail party, you would very possibly be served a drink of bang lassi, and so you would have a gentle, kind of uplifting, friendly
Yeah.
high, if you will, and it's a much gentler, if you. I'm not promoting cannabis for recreational use. I'm promoting it, educating about it for spiritual use because that's the least understood aspect of it that
Mhm.
most people don't know. However, if there needs to, humans are always going to. It's universal. It's going to go on. Been going on forever, and it will always go on. It will always be the case that humans like to change their consciousness one way or another, whether it's tobacco, which also changes consciousness, or even coffee, which changes
Okay.
consciousness, or alcohol, or any number of other plant substances which change consciousness. Humans are drawn toward that. And if there has to be one that's healthy for society, relatively speaking, compared to alcohol, cannabis is far superior
Okay. Wow.
because people can use it for escaping, which is not necessarily great, but gentle use of it, not addiction, not addictive use, not overly dependent on it, but social use. Mild effects of cannabis are much preferable to alcohol, in my opinion, because alcohol. I mean, alcohol used to be a tranquilizer, before they came up with these strong drugs for operations. They used to use alcohol because alcohol numbs you, makes you
Mhm.
numb. Whereas
Anesthesia,
cannabis,
kind of like
what's
anesthesia.
that?
Anesthesia.
Yeah,
Anesthesia.
it used to be an anesthetic before they
Hmm.
had powerful anesthetics like morphine and all that they have now. They used to use alcohol commonly, and so that's what it does. It sort of slows down the system, numbs you. You drink enough alcohol, you don't think straight anymore. You know how that goes, I'm sure. Slows your reaction time.
Yeah.
It tends to, at a certain point, kind of isolate you from people
Hmm.
because you think you're being clever maybe, but you sound like an idiot. um, Whereas cannabis, although some people can get what we might call motor mouth, they can get talking too much, or
Yeah.
they think what they have to say is so amazing, when it's really not. However, if you actually know how to use this plant in a skillful way for social purposes, and you don't depend on it every day, and you don't get too high or too stoned, as we say, then what cannabis does is it softens barriers. It opens up channels between people. It can be a way of connecting with people. So yeah, I'll just toss that one in too.
Wow. Oh, man, now it makes sense. Okay. So use it, like if we use it in moderate amount, then it's good, beneficial for health in a nutshell.
It definitely has potential that way. Cannabis can be a sacrament of peace. It's a gentle
Mm-hmm.
substance. Um,
Got it.
Again, not trying to get blitzed out, not trying to get completely, wrecked, as we might say over here. And again, that's not what I'm promoting. But if you have to have a social substance, a kind of like standard lubricator of social interaction, and we do, apparently, certainly in the West. I don't know what they do in India at parties and whatnot, but in the West, alcohol is the main substance that's used at parties and dinner parties and all that sort of thing.
Definitely. Yeah.
And for most people, but cannabis is superior to that for
Mm-hmm.
the reasons I just mentioned.
Got
Yeah,
it. So in order
yeah.
to practice your this thing of yours, like being a holistic healer and like a promoter of this thing, are you allowed to use it on your patients? Can you use it?
Well, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not
Okay.
exactly a healer in that sense, It is legal in Canada. Cannabis
Okay.
is legal. Marijuana
Okay.
is legal in Canada for any kind of use,
Mm-hmm.
no restrictions. What I have done, apart from my own use, I use it for my own meditation, but also not so much anymore. I've kind of eased up on this, but for about a dozen years or more, I was maybe 3, 4, 5 times a year, maybe a little more frequently sometimes. I was guiding or leading ceremonies like circles, meditation circles with cannabis, and using it for spiritual purposes. So to help people soften up, open up, open up their hearts a little bit, relax more, open up into the peace that cannabis can bring. So,
Oh,
a really useful way to think of cannabis when it's understood and used with intention and understanding
got it.
is it's a non-specific or unspecific amplifier. So
Mm-hmm.
there are biochemical explanations for how that happens, but the simple version is that it's an amplifier. It amplifies sense perceptions. It amplifies experience altogether in many ways, and then it becomes how you channel that. So when I lead these ceremonies, what I'm doing is I'm helping people channel that into being more present.
Got
So
it.
either we're doing a silent kind of follow the breath meditation, or we're doing some guided meditations where I guide them doing some breath work and things like that. Or I use sound as well. I have these singing bowls, crystal
Yeah.
bowls, and I have some other little instruments that I
Mm.
use. And the purpose for everything I do in the ceremonies is the same, is to help people get past their thinking minds, right? And open up. Just breathe, relax, pay
Wow.
attention. And because of its amplifying effect, because cannabis is an amplifier, it can deepen meditation. It it can, but you have to channel it. Pardon me. It can be challenging to do that because it also can exacerbate or stimulate the thinking mind too.
Mm.
But this is an essential understanding of spiritual teachings altogether. which is that, and if you've paid any attention to spiritual traditions of India, you know that nirvana or enlightenment is a real thing. At
Yeah.
least that's what the mystics would say, the teachers would say that. But then how can an individual achieve, so to speak, enlightenment or nirvana? Well, there are many techniques, but there's only one ultimate way in a sense, and that is you have to you have to be able to allow space in the thinking mind. You do not think your way to wisdom or to enlightenment. That just doesn't happen. That's just your mind going right. But when you can quiet your mind, and that's what meditation is for, when you can allow the thoughts to sort of settle down and allow some space in those thoughts, then you can potentially open up what is already there all the time, which is divine reality or whatever term you want to put on it. It's the nature of life altogether. The creative source of life, or the eternal creation of life. It's all ultimately, although, I'm not saying I'm enlightened, that's for certain, but I'm pretty sure from my own glimpses and from the people I've known and from the reading I've done and so on, that every single one of us is capable of experiencing that state of enlightenment. Ultimately, it's not easy because we're so far from it, but we're all capable of it. And where cannabis comes in, as do the other psychedelics, but cannabis in particular, because it's, in a sense, gentler, safer than some of these really strong psychedelics, it has this potential as an amplifier to deepen. If you can quiet the mind, then it can deepen that experience of being present in the what you might call sacred space of life.
Hmm.
Okay?
When it comes to ceremonials that you used to conduct, I guess it sort of work as a catharsis. Once you had that thing, people would release their emotions. They would speak out to get something off their chest, right? Sort of
No,
work like that.
no, not
No?
like that. No, that's different. Although you could potentially use it that way sometimes. But no, it's not about speaking out because that's again using the thinking mind, right?
Okay.
It, you know, the gateway to wisdom. Have you ever heard of the Persian mystic poet Rumi?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even
okay,
I've
so
read a lot of quotes like you are not the drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean.
right. Well, if you look back at some of those things, you'll see that Rumi talks a lot about quieting the mind, about
Okay.
silence. He has lines like, silence is the language of God, all else is poor translation. Or he'll say, let go of thinking so you can discover the source of life. So, wisdom, enlightenment, or whatever term you want to put on it, is found when we can quiet the mind, because it's the mind that gets in the way. The thinking mind, it's like it creates a cloud of obscuration that blocks off the light of wisdom, of enlightenment, right? So that's what meditation is ultimately for, is to help tame the mind, to quiet the mind, right? And so where cannabis can come in, if it's understood and used carefully, judiciously, with skill, is that it's neutral. It's a neutral or non-specific amplifier. So it gives this extra enhanced sort of focus or energy. And if you can channel it into opening, into surrendering into that present moment, it can be useful because it can deepen that experience temporarily, of course. It's not going to it's not going to take you in there and leave you. It's a two-way street. You go in, you have a visit, and you come back out again, right? But when you're
Mhm.
back out of it, you've had that experience, and then it becomes kind of like a marker point, like, oh, that is real, that is possible. And that's what I said about psychedelics earlier in our conversation, is that you can have absolutely amazing experiences on them. But those experiences in themselves are just what they are. They are experiences, right? And they're only of use if you can take those lessons, take those insights, and bring them into your daily life. And so it's very important that people are exploring spirituality, that whether they're using psychedelics or cannabis or none of those, they are in a, working to deepen their sense of presence daily, more or less, ideally through some kind of simple meditation practice, and some kinds of yoga as well are very valuable for that. I mean, ultimately, yoga, I don't know how people in India think about yoga these days. I know it has a long history in India, obviously. But in the West, it's not, the depth of yoga is not fully understood.
True.
Because mostly what people are doing in the West, and there's a lot of it. Every time you turn a corner, there's another yoga teacher, right? But what people are doing is hatha yoga,
Yeah.
which is only one of 4 or 5 major kinds of yoga, right? There's pranayama, there's royal yoga, etc., right? So
Mm.
ultimately, the word yoga means something like union,
Yeah.
united.
Union of body,
Yeah,
mind, and soul.
yeah, it's a union. So it's the same. Um, and ultimately, I think yoga is also would at its ultimate or best would also be about silencing the mind, learning how to quiet the mind and open up to the Holy Spirit, which exists behind all that, right? And again, I'll just say one more time that the cannabis can open that channel for a temporary visit, which hopefully will be inspirational, that you can carry on and be reminded that you've had, that's real, that can happen, and you just keep working away at trying to be present, trying to relax, trying to stay open, etc., right? And similarly with the so-called strong psychedelics as well. They can, they can open up channels very powerfully to the divine. And they can also, well, basically, the psychedelics are sort of a different, I mean, the big psychedelics. Cannabis, in a sense, is a psychedelic too. Remember, we're talking about marijuana, cannabis and marijuana, just two different words, right, for the same thing.
Mm.
So the so-called major psychedelics, like the psilocybin mushrooms or the ayahuasca or the LSD, for example, or the peyote, they kind of have two interwoven capabilities. One of those, they work together, but one of them is that they can they can help you dissolve this thinking mind that gets in the way and show you just by their power, they are amplifiers. They're really powerful amplifiers oftentimes, right? So what they can show you is this unconditioned reality, however you define it, nirvana, enlightenment, or whatever, the divine love, the divine light, whatever that is, they can show you that. Again, it's temporary, and hopefully it moves you so that you make changes in your life, or you're inspired by that, or you bring those lessons back. That's one aspect of its sort of interwoven function. The other aspect is that the psychedelics can show you the truth about who you are personally. They can show you the blind spots that you have. They can open up uh, memories or insights into the ways that you hold yourself back, your wounds, you might say, your past traumas and things like that. So they kind of work together, sort of, two prongs in a sense like that. One to help heal your individual's psychological profile or so, whatever, and the other one to open up the more vast spiritual life that exists beyond all of that. Okay?
Wow. And on that note, I guess let's call it a day because the meeting is compelling us to end it. And I would like to tell that thank you for sharing your profound insights about psychedelics. And again, like you are supposed to use it under some sort of supervision, right? You are not supposed to do it on your own. You
Yeah,
need the.
well, set and setting again. Setting is your intention and everything you bring to it. They're not for everybody, by the way.
Mhm.
They need to be understood as not artificial enlightenment or whatever. They're not drugs when they're understood properly. They are healers. They are medicinal sacraments. They're pure natural substances from the earth, given to humanity to help open up the channels that have been shut down. But they need to be done carefully, preferably with expert guidance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once again, thanks a lot, Steve, for sharing your years of experience about psychedelics, and I'm sure that my viewers will learn a lot. Even I learned a lot from you, so thank you for sparing some sort of time out of your busy schedule, and thank you for being on this podcast with me.
Sure. And if any of your listeners have questions, you can pass those questions along to me and I'll respond to them.
Definitely, I will
And
do that.
they can also read either my books, How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World, or Cannabis and Spirituality. I have a website, Stephen Gray Vision, StephenGray.
Check it
And by
out.
the way, so
Yeah,
let me know. I'm curious. I will be curious to see if you get some listeners for this. I'll be curious if people are hearing this and if they're writing to you and giving you any comments or questions.
definitely. I'll ping you right away whenever I get some sort of questions about this, and I'll
Uh-huh. Yeah.
keep in touch, Stephen. It was really
And
nice having this
send me a
conversation.
link for it so I can see it too, okay?
Sure, sure, definitely, definitely.
Okay.
All right.
Be
Thank you
well.
for your time
Uh,
and take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.